Before anyone speaks, there is always a moment like this. It is quiet, almost unnoticed. The world has not yet asked anything of you. No explanations are required, no defenses are raised. There is only breath, presence, and a stillness that feels older than thought itself. In that space, nothing needs to be proven. A grandfather once used to sit this way in the early morning, long before the house stirred. He would hold his cup with both hands, not to warm them, but to feel the weight of something steady. He rarely spoke during these moments, not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood something many people rush past, that the most important things arrive before words. Silence is often mistaken for emptiness. But it is not empty, it is full of observation, full of memory, full of restraint that has been earned slowly through years of watching what happens when people speak too quickly, react too fast, or try too hard to be understood. In that quiet, the mind settles. Not completely. Thoughts still come, but they no longer demand attention. They pass like clouds, and you begin to see the sky behind them. This is where inner power begins. Though it does not announce itself. It does not need to. Most people fear this moment. They reach for noise to escape it. They fill it with opinions, explanations, reactions. Silence feels vulnerable to them, as if something might be taken if they do not speak first. But those who sit with it long enough learn that silence does not take. It gives perspective. It gives distance from impulse. It gives the dignity of choosing rather than being pulled. The grandfather understood that life rarely tests us in loud, dramatic ways at first. It tests us quietly, in small moments when no one is watching, in pauses where we decide who we are going to be before the world pushes back. He would say nothing, but his stillness carried weight. It made the room feel different, as if time slowed out of respect. When he finally spoke later in the day, his words were few. And because of that, they lasted. This is not the silence of avoidance. It is the silence of preparation, the kind that forms before a river moves, gathering strength beneath the surface. From the outside, it looks calm. Inside, it is deliberate. There is a reason wisdom often feels old. It moves slowly. It waits. It listens longer than it speaks. It knows that reacting is easy, but restraint shapes a life. In this first quiet moment, nothing has gone wrong yet. No one has challenged you. No misunderstanding has appeared. And still, the lesson is already present. You do not need to fill every space. You do not need to announce your worth. You are allowed to arrive gently. They may later mistake silence for uncertainty. They may assume it means you have nothing to offer. But before that happens, before the world presses in, there is this moment where you remember something simple and grounding. Your strength does not begin when you respond. It begins when you can remain still, when you can sit with yourself without urgency, when you trust that what matters will not be lost in silence. This is where the story begins, not with action, not with conflict, but with a quiet pause that asks nothing of you except to stay. Eventually, the quiet is interrupted, not by sound, but by feeling. Something is said. A look lingers too long. A moment lands heavier than it should. And suddenly, the heart begins to stir. It tightens, not with anger yet, but with awareness. The awareness that a response is expected. That silence which once felt spacious now feels like a test. This is where discomfort enters. The mind starts arranging words before they are invited. Explanations line up, ready to defend a version of yourself that feels suddenly exposed. There is a subtle pressure to speak, to clarify, to correct what might be misunderstood before it hardens into truth. The grandfather knew this feeling well. He used to describe it as a knock from the inside, not loud, persistent. A reminder that you are human, that you care how you are seen, that being misread still stings no matter how much wisdom you carry. Silence becomes harder here, not because it has lost its value, but because emotion has found its voice. The body reacts first, a quickening breath, a tightening chest, the old instinct to protect, to push back, to make sure they know who you really are. This is the moment most people confuse with weakness. Holding silence here feels like standing barefoot on cold ground. Everything in you wants relief. Words promise that relief. Reaction offers the illusion of control, but illusion fades quickly. They may not be attacking. They may not even be aware of what they've stirred. Still, the feeling is real, and resisting the urge to answer it takes something deeper than discipline. It takes trust. Trust that not every discomfort is a signal to act. Trust that your worth does not evaporate when left undefended. Trust that silence can hold emotion without collapsing under it. The grandfather would sit through these moments without changing his posture. He did not suppress the feeling. He allowed it to move through him, like a wave that knows where the shore is. He understood that reacting too soon often hands your power to the very moment that unsettled you. There is a quiet courage in staying present with discomfort. It means listening not just to what is happening around you, but to what is happening within. It means noticing how quickly the mind tries to escape the unease by filling the air, and gently choosing not to follow. This is not numbness. It is sensitivity ref. You begin to notice the difference between speaking because you have something true to offer and speaking because silence feels unbearable. One comes from clarity, the other from fear. They may continue, a comment, a judgment, an assumption. Each one adds weight to the pause, and still you remain, not frozen, aware. In this space, something subtle shifts. The emotion that once demanded immediate expression begins to soften. It does not disappear, but it loosens its grip. You realize that you are not being overwhelmed. You are simply being tested by your own impulse. The grandfather believed this was one of life's quiet crossroads, not the kind marked by signs, but the kind that shapes you without ceremony. You can step into reaction, or you can stay with the discomfort long enough to understand it. Most growth does not arrive with certainty. It arrives with restraint. By the time the urge to speak fades, you see more clearly. You see that silence has not harmed you. It has protected something fragile and important, your ability to choose your response rather than surrender it. And though the discomfort lingers, it no longer feels urgent, it feels instructive. This is where emotional discipline begins, not in controlling others, but in staying with yourself when everything in you wants to escape the moment. After a while, something else settles in. It is not the discomfort anymore. It is the realization that silence has been noticed, and not always kindly. When you do not explain yourself, they begin to explain you instead, quietly at first. Then, with more confidence, assumptions take shape where words were withheld. They speak and they do not see. They see the absence of a response and mistake it for uncertainty. They watch restraint and call it indifference. They look at calm and decide it must be emptiness. This is not cruelty, it is habit. People fill silence with their own meaning. The grandfather accepted this without bitterness. He knew that being misunderstood was not a failure of character, but a consequence of depth. Not everyone can see beneath still water. Many only trust movement. There is a particular loneliness in this stage, not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being unseen. You are present, attentive, aware, and still something about you is missing from their understanding. It would be easy to correct them. A few well-chosen words could shift the picture they hold of you, but you hesitate, not because you are unsure, but because you are beginning to sense the cost of being fully understood by those who are not listening. They talk around you. They interpret your silence as permission to define the story. Sometimes they do it kindly, sometimes they do it carelessly. Either way, the result is the same, a version of you that feels incomplete, slightly distorted. This is where many people abandon silence. The discomfort sharpens here, not just emotional, but existential. Who am I? They do not see me. What does my restraint say about me if no one understands it? The grandfather believed this was one of the most revealing moments in a person's life. Not because of what others think, but because of what you decide matters. He used to say that misunderstanding is often the price of self-respect. If you live slowly in a fast world, they will assume you are behind. If you listen more than you speak, they will assume you have less to say. And if you do not rush to defend yourself, they will assume you need defending. There is a quiet grief in letting those assumptions stand. It feels like allowing a door to close without explaining why you didn't walk through it. But something deeper begins to take shape here, a boundary that does not need to be announced. You begin to see that being understood by everyone is not the same as being true to yourself. And often, the two are in conflict. They may speak with certainty. Certainty often sounds convincing even when it is wrong, and your silence in comparison may seem like surrender. But inside, something else is happening. You are learning to separate your identity from their perception. This is not easy. The urge to clarify remains, to offer context, to soften their judgment with explanation. But slowly, you realize that explanation does not always lead to understanding. Sometimes it only feeds curiosity that was never rooted in care. The grandfather watched this happen again and again. People would speak over him, about him, around him. He let them. Not because he agreed, but because he knew that those who truly wished to understand would eventually notice the consistency beneath his quiet, and those who did not were never listening in the first place. There is strength in this acceptance, not loud strength, a grounded one. It does not push back, it holds. You begin to feel less reactive to their words, not numb, but less entangled. Their assumptions no longer feel like emergencies. They are just stories, and you are no longer responsible for every story told about you. This is where silence stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like protection. You are misunderstood, and still you remain intact. There comes a point when the noise around you no longer asks for an answer. It continues, but it no longer pulls. Something subtle has shifted inward. You are still listening, still aware, but your attention has moved beneath the surface, away from what is being said and toward what is being revealed. This is the moment of listening beneath the noise. The grandfather used to say that understanding rarely arrives from the outside. It emerges when you stop trying to correct the world and begin to observe yourself within it. Silence, once a defense, becomes a doorway. You begin to notice patterns, not just in them, but in you. The way certain words used to tighten your chest, the way certain assumptions once demanded a response. Now, they pass with less stir. Bants. Not because they are harmless, but because you are no longer standing in their path. In this deeper listening, the mind becomes quieter, not empty, but precise. Thoughts arrive with more space around them. You can see them forming, recognize their origins, and choose whether to follow them. This is not control, it is familiarity. You realize how often reactions were never about the moment itself, but about older echoes, memories of not being seen, not being heard, not being valued. Silence gives you time to notice these echoes without being ruled by them. They may still speak. Their words may still miss the truth of you. But now, you are listening for something else. The way your body responds, the way your emotions rise and fall, the way your sense of self remains steady beneath it all. The grandfather believed this was where restraint transforms into insight. When you stop using silence to endure and start using it to understand, you begin to hear your own values more clearly. What matters to you no longer feels theoretical. It becomes felt. You know without explanation which battles are not yours, which misunderstandings do not require correction, which moments are better met with presence than response. This inward clarity does not come with pride. It comes with humility. You see how often you once reacted simply to relieve discomfort, how often you spoke not to express truth, but to escape silence. And there is no shame in this realization, only honest. Listening beneath the noise also reveals something unexpected: compassion, not just for yourself, but for them. You begin to sense the restlessness behind their certainty, the insecurity beneath their assumptions, not as an excuse, but as context. The grandfather never tried to outgrow his humanity. He allowed himself to feel the sting of being misunderstood, but he no longer allowed that sting to dictate his behavior. He listened to it, learned from it, and let it pass. In this space, silence becomes active. It is no longer about holding back words. It is about holding awareness. You may notice moments where you almost speak, then pause, not out of fear, but out of discernment. The pause feels natural now. It carries intelligence. This is where inner power becomes recognizable, not as force, but as alignment. Your inner world and outer behavior begin to match. You are no longer performing restraint. You are inhabiting it. They may still not see this shift. That is fine. This listening was never for them. It is for the part of you that needed permission to slow down, to stop reacting, to trust that clarity does not require immediacy. As you listen more deeply, you realize something quietly profound. Silence did not make you smaller. It revealed the space where you have always been whole. And in that space, you are no longer waiting to be understood. You are understanding yourself. At some point, the moment arrives again. A familiar tension returns. A comment, a look, a situation that once would have pulled words from you without asking. The difference now is not in what happens, it is in what you choose. This is the quiet crossing. The grandfather used to say that life rarely changes in dramatic declarations. It shifts in small, almost invisible decisions. And one of the most powerful is this: the choice not to react. Not because you have nothing to say, not because you are unsure, but because you have learned the weight of response and you respect it too much to spend it carelessly. The urge still appears. That has not disappeared. Emotion rises just as it always did. But now it no longer owns you. You recognize it as a signal, not a command. Silence here is no longer passive, it is deliberate. You feel the space between what happens and what you do. That space, once narrow, has widened. Inside it lives choice. You could speak, you could explain, you could defend. And because you could, you don't have to. They may mistake this for withdrawal. They may assume you are holding back out of fear, but the truth is quieter and stronger. You are holding yourself. The grandfather never framed this as self-control. He called it self-respect. Reacting impulsively often meant allowing someone else's behavior to shape his inner state. Choosing silence meant he remained his own. There is a steadiness that comes with this decision. Not rigid, not cold, grounded. You are no longer rushing to restore balance by correcting the moment. You trust that balance can exist without your immediate intervention. This is not avoidance. Avoidance turns away. This stays present. You are listening. You are aware. You are simply not giving your energy to what does not deserve it. In choosing silence over reaction, something subtle happens. The situation loses some of its power. What once felt urgent now feels manageable. You realize how often urgency was created by your own need to respond, not by the moment itself. They may continue speaking, they may even escalate, but you remain where you are, not unmoved, but unshaken. The grandfather believed this was the moment when inner strength becomes visible, not to others, but to yourself. You see that you are capable of restraint without suppression, calm without disconnection, and with that realization comes relief. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are no longer torn between what you feel and how you act. They begin to align. There is dignity in this alignment, a sense of standing upright without needing to assert it. You do not announce your boundaries, you embody them. Choosing not to react also teaches you patience with outcomes. You release the need to control how the moment resolves. You understand that not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Not every tension needs to be eased by words. Some things resolve on their own when you stop feeding them. The grandfather would often say that silence, used wisely, ends more conflicts than argument. Ever could, not because it wins, but because it refuses to participate in what diminishes you. This choice does not make you invisible. It makes you selective. You begin to sense when words would add clarity and when they would only add noise. And in moments where silence serves truth better than speech, you choose it without bitterness. There is a calm satisfaction in this, not pride, but assurance. You know why you are quiet, and that knowledge is enough. This is where restraint becomes a strength you trust. Not something you endure, but something you stand on, and in that stillness your power no longer seeks a reaction, it rests in choice. Over time, silence begins to change its shape. What once felt like effort slowly becomes instinct. You no longer count the moments you hold back. You no longer measure the restraint. It settles into you, quietly, like a habit formed without force. This is where growth begins to reveal itself. The grandfather noticed this long before he could explain it. He would smile gently when asked how he stayed so calm. He never claimed control. He spoke of familiarity, with himself, with emotion, with the way moments pass if you let them. Silence, practiced with intention, starts to teach. Not through instruction, but through repetition. Each time you choose not to react, something inside you strengthens. Not dramatically, steadily. You begin to trust your inner timing. There is less urgency now, less need to fill space. You realize that clarity does not rush. It arrives when it is ready, often after the moment has passed, and that is fine. Not everything needs to be settled immediately. They may still speak in ways that once unsettled you, but the reaction no longer forms so quickly. There is space between stimulus and response that feels natural, even protective. The grandfather believed this space was where wisdom lives, not in knowing what to say, but in knowing when saying nothing preserves your integrity. Growth through restraint is subtle. It does not announce progress. There are no markers, no applause, but you notice it in small ways. The steadiness of your breath, the absence of regret after a difficult interaction, the quiet confidence that follows a moment once filled with tension. You begin to carry yourself differently, not guarded but grounded. Your presence becomes less reactive, more intentional. People may not notice the change, but you do. There is also a softening that happens here. Restraint, when it is no longer forced, makes room for compassion. You are less defensive, less quick to assume harm. You see moments as they are, not as threats to your sense of self. They may still misunderstand you. That does not change, but your relationship to that misunderstanding does. It no longer feels personal. It feels distant, almost neutral. The grandfather often said that when silence matures, it becomes a form of generosity, not because it excuses behavior, but because it does not escalate it. You stop adding your energy to what would only grow louder if fed. In this stage, silence also sharpens discernment. You begin to notice when speaking would truly matter, and when it does, your words carry more weight. They are fewer but clearer, calm but firm. Because you have learned restraint, you do not fear expression. You respect it. Growth through restraint is not about shrinking. It is about refinement. You are shaping how you show up, not by reacting less, but by reacting more intentionally. There is a sense of internal order now. Emotions rise and fall without chaos. Thoughts move without urgency. You are no longer rushing to manage impressions. You are simply present. The grandfather lived this quietly. People often described him as peaceful, but peace was not something he chased. It was something that arrived when resistance softened. Silence taught him that strength does not need to prove itself. It does not need to be seen. It needs to be felt by the one carrying it. And you begin to feel it now, not as pride, not as superiority, but as stability. You trust yourself more. You trust your ability to stay steady when moments become unclear. You trust that you do not lose yourself by remaining quiet. This is growth that cannot be taken from you. It does not depend on agreement or approval. It lives inside, reinforced by every moment you chose restraint and discovered that nothing was lost, only gained. Silence, once a challenge, has become a companion, and in its presence you stand a little more firmly in who you are. Over time, silence begins to change its shape. What once felt like effort slowly becomes instinct. You no longer count the moments you hold back or measure how much restraint it takes. It settles into you quietly, like a habit formed without force, without praise, without anyone noticing. This is where growth begins to reveal itself. The grandfather noticed this long before he had words for it. When asked how he stayed so calm, he would smile softly and change the subject. He never spoke of control. He spoke of familiarity, with himself, with emotion, with the way moments pass if you allow them to. Silence, practiced gently, starts to teach, not through instruction, but through repetition. Each time you choose not to react, something inside you strengthens. Not suddenly, not loudly, but steadily, like roots growing deeper underground. You begin to trust your inner timing. There is less urgency now, less pressure to respond, to clarify, to explain. You realize that clarity does not rush. It arrives when it is ready, often after the moment has already passed. And that feels acceptable now. They may still speak in ways that once unsettled you. Their words may still carry assumptions, judgments, or impatience, but the reaction no longer forms so quickly. The space between what happens and what you do feels natural, even protective. The grandfather believed this space was where wisdom lay. Not in knowing the perfect response, but in knowing when saying nothing preserves your dignity. Growth through restraint is subtle. It does not announce progress. There are no signs, no applause, but you notice it in small ways. In the steadiness of your breath, in the absence of regret after a difficult moment, in the quiet confidence that follows situations that once left you restless. You begin to carry yourself differently, not guarded but grounded. Your presence feels calmer, more deliberate. People may not be able to name the change, but you feel it clearly. There is also a softening that happens here. Restraint, when it no longer feels forced, creates room for compassion. You become less defensive, less quick to assume harm. You start seeing moments as they are, rather than as threats to your sense of self. They may still misunderstand you. That does not disappear. But your relationship to that misunderstanding changes. It no longer feels personal. It no longer demands correction. It becomes something you can observe without tension. The grandfather often said that mature silence is a form of generosity, not because it excuses behavior, but because it refuses to add fuel to what would only grow louder if fed. In this stage, silence sharpens discernment. You begin to sense when words truly matter, and when they would only add noise. When you do speak, your words carry weight. They are fewer but clearer, calm but firm. Because you have learned restraint, you no longer fear expression. You respect it. Growth through restraint is not about becoming smaller. It is about refinement. You are shaping how you show up in the world, not by reacting less, but by reacting with intention. There is an internal order now. Emotions rise and fall without chaos. Thoughts move without urgency. You are no longer managing impressions. You are simply present. The grandfather lived this quietly. People called him peaceful, but peace was not something he pursued. It arrived when resistance softened and silence stopped feeling like a test. You begin to feel this too. Not as pride, not as superiority, but as stability. You trust yourself more. You trust your ability to remain steady when moments become unclear. You trust that staying quiet does not mean losing yourself. This growth cannot be taken from you. It does not depend on agreement or approval. It lives inside, strengthened by every moment you chose restraint and discovered that nothing was lost, only gained. Silence, once a challenge, has become a companion, and in its presence you stand a little more firmly in who you are. There is a point when strength no longer feels like something you carry. It feels like something you are. It does not arrive suddenly. There is no moment of realization that asks to be announced. It settles quietly, after enough restraint has been chosen, after enough silence has been trusted. And one day, you notice that you are no longer trying to appear strong. You simply are. The grandfather never spoke about strength the way others did. He did not associate it with firmness of voice or certainty of opinion. To him, strength was recognizable by its absence of display. It did not lean forward. It did not interrupt. It did not rush to be known. It stayed. You begin to understand this now. The urge to explain yourself has softened, not because you feel unseen, but because you no longer need to be seen in every moment. Your sense of worth has detached itself from immediate recognition. They may still speak, they may still misunderstand, but their words no longer reach as far inside you, not because you have hardened, but because you are no longer exposed. There is a quiet confidence in this, one that does not need to defend itself. You stop rehearsing conversations in your mind. You stop imagining how things could have been said differently. The past loosens its hold. You notice how little energy you now spend on reaction, how much space has opened where tension used to live. That space is not empty. It is calm. It is self-contained. The grandfather carried himself this way. People sometimes mistook his stillness for detachment. But those who stayed long enough sensed something else, a grounded presence that did not shift with opinion or pressure. Strength that needs no display does not announce boundaries. It embodies them. You no longer feel compelled to correct every assumption. You allow others to hold their version of you, knowing they are incomplete. What they see is no longer your responsibility. This does not mean you have withdrawn. You are still engaged, still attentive, still human. But you are no longer reactive to being defined from the outside. There is dignity in this distance. You begin to choose carefully where your words go, not out of calculation, but out of respect for yourself. You know that not every moment deserves your explanation. Not every situation deserves your voice. When you do speak, it is not to assert power, it is to share clarity. And because you speak less, what you say carries more presence. They may not notice the shift, or they may feel it without understanding it. Some will test it, others will step back. Either way, you remain unchanged. The grandfather believed this was the quiet reward of restraint, the moment when silence no longer feels like something you are doing, but something you have become fluent in. You trust yourself now. You trust your inner steadiness. You trust that your value is not diminished by quiet nor increased by reaction. This kind of strength does not seek attention. It does not compare itself. It does not compete. It rests. And because it rests, it endures. There is relief in this stage, a gentle release from the need to prove, to perform, to be constantly understood. You no longer measure your days by how you were perceived, but by how you remained aligned. The world may continue as it always has, loud, empathy, and quick to judge. But you are no longer shaped by its urgency. You have found something internal that does not require validation. Strength that needs no display is invisible to those who look only for noise, but to you it is unmistakable. It feels like standing firmly without bracing, like breathing without effort. The grandfather lived this until the end, not admired by all, not fully understood, but deeply intact. And now you recognize that same quiet strength settling into you. Not something to show, something to keep. In the end, nothing dramatic happens. There is no final conversation that resolves everything, no moment where they suddenly understand, no recognition that arrives to confirm what you have learned. Life simply continues, quieter now, softer at the edges. And so do you. You find yourself resting in a calm that does not depend on circumstances. It is not the calm of avoidance or distance, but of acceptance. You no longer wait for silence to be comfortable. It already is. It has become a familiar place, one you return to without effort. The grandfather used to sit like this in the evenings when the day had finished saying what it needed to say. He did not review every moment. He did not replay conversations. He trusted that what mattered had already settled where it belonged. You begin to trust this too. There is a sense of resolution that does not come from answers, but from alignment. You feel whole, not because everything makes sense, but because you are no longer resisting what is. The need to react has loosened its grip. The need to be understood has softened into something quieter. They may still speak, they may still misunderstand, but it no longer disturbs the center of you. Their voices move around your life, not through it. You hear them without absorbing them. This is not indifference, it is peace with boundaries. You notice how your inner world feels steadier. Thoughts arrive and pass without urgency. Emotions rise and fall without demanding action. There is space now, not empty space, but breathable space.
The grandfather believed that this was the true reward of emotional discipline. Not control over others, not superiority, but rest. The kind of rest that comes when you are no longer at war with your own reactions. You no longer ask yourself what you should have said. You no longer measure silence against imagined outcomes. You trust that what was left unsaid did not weaken you. It preserved you. There is strength here, but it does not announce itself. It feels inward, settled, like a deep-rooted tree that no longer sways with every change in weather. You move through the world with quiet self-respect, not rigid, not withdrawn, simply intact. You engage when it matters. You remain silent when it serves peace. And you do not apologize to yourself for either. They may never know the journey you took to arrive here. That is all right. This strength was never meant for display. It was meant or living. The grandfather never left behind grand speeches or clear instructions. What he left was an example, a way of being that spoke without words, a calm presence that did not demand attention yet quietly reshaped the space around it. Now, you carry something similar. Not loudly, not visibly, but steadily. You no longer rush to fill silence. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You no longer mistake reaction for strength. You have learned the difference, and it has settled into you like a truth that does not need repeating. This is not the end of effort. Life will still test you. Moments will still arise. But you meet them from a place that feels grounded, inwardly strong, and quietly clear. And when the day grows quiet again, when there is nothing left to explain or defend, you rest there easily, in silence, whole, unshaken,